Greetings, everyone. I have a very special guest today, which the information that's going to be provided is going to be a game changer. I am introducing everyone here to Kenneth Scott of the House of Cousins from the Gemstone University, also PanTerra Vida. And Kenneth is going to give a little bit of a background into who he is, how he got here, and what this is all about for people. And then we're going to get into some really important information that I think everybody does need to know because we are moving into a completely different consciousness and we're moving into a different way of living. So Kenneth has incredible uh, a marker for change in a big way, which he will get into for everyone. The time is now. Kenneth?
Yes. And you can call me Ken.
Ken.
So thank you, Lauda. And it's really a pleasure to finally have a recorded session for public release. And you and I have been tapping around each other for quite a long time. We didn't directly meet until 2 years ago, I think it's been. But I've followed your work for decades, for as long as it's been out there, and always felt very connected and very aligned with you, and especially your focus on the people who you work with and who are tracking you with all of your work and your videos and everything. The focus on what you've called prime or real beings, and and as all of you who know that's who you are, who are listening to us now, you know that you have known that since the beginning of this lifetime. So that's pretty much universal for those who really are grounded in the substance of your being and the awareness of being what Lauda calls a prime being, somebody who is real, somebody who is still connected to their origination, inception from source, retains that source connection, has always felt out of place in this reality, while at the same time feeling that we really know, well, we may not feel in place here, but we know we're supposed to be here. So part of what we're going to talk about is, well, why is that? And how does that relate to what people like to call the matrix? And what is the matrix? Well, we know what the matrix is. It's a holographic containment reality that is virtually disconnected from true source, true living presence, but it's not fully disconnected. It's a containment field that has attempted to contain the living beings who are truly source connected, who create from their being and who co-create and who are not, attached to the hierarchical structure and the control grids and all of that at the core of our being, while at the same time being very attached to all of that, the control grids, the code of the matrix, and all of that. So my background is that about 40, what is it? Today is, the year is 2025. So about 35, 36 years ago, I shifted from what was my career at that time. My life and my business career was very worldwide. I was in the gem and jewelry and metals business and the mineral business, and I interface with dozens, if not hundreds, of people, ethnicities, races, land masses, and all of that. I had a very, very deep and strong connection to the earth through the mineral kingdom. And that was a great joy for me. But at the same time, I had to deal with what we all deal with, the money system, the legal system, and all of that. Had great success and then great cataclysmic fall from that success. So that shifted me into needing to pursue figuring out what was really going on in this false narrative reality. And that led me into the study of law. and that was about 1989, 1990. And so I set out on that path. And of course, law is very much intricately interwoven with the system and the study of money. Ultimately, my pursuit in law and the pursuit in money led me into a much, much deeper pursuit of history, which I have been very deeply involved with my whole life. For decades, I've studied the roots of religion. Wanted to know really how that really started thousands of years ago, really millions of years ago, and how that interface and connected to my study in law, monetary systems, and so forth. So, and of course, since I've been a very young being or in this incarnate form body, probably 5 years old, I started studying esoterica before, quote unquote, studying religion. So I've been involved in the study of metaphysics, multidimensionality, esoterica for about 65, 66 years. So that was my foundation. I was definitely much more in that reality than the physical reality. But studying law and the monetary system and the history related to that, the geopolitics of the evolution of law, money, dominance, control, and all the rest of it. Of course, don't forget religion. Um, that basically the last 30 to 35 years has been a process for me of integrating it all, seeing how it all fits together, how it fits in the energetics of a holographic reality, and everything that I know that everybody who follows Lauda, you also are involved in and study quite extensively. So to begin, we're going to talk a bit about law, and why the study of law. How does that relate to the control grid in the system of the matrix? How does that relate to our capacity as a real being, as a creator and a co-creator who is still very much source connected? How does that relate to the history of the control systems that we now are totally immersed in? And what is the real purpose in our lives individually and really collectively for all of what I've just said?
Exactly. And so we find ourselves within these civilizations that are created fundamentally from the bottom up by these elites who have systematically imprisoned everyone in its system. So when you speak of law and religion and all of these different governing systems and your study, I find it very interesting because a lot of that is really all of the same type of control.
Yeah, they're all facets of the same
Hmm.
system, no question.
So can you go into a little bit deeper of how law, in the way that you've studied it and what you've discovered it, can be used in a positive way for everyone who is trapped within this system that has systematically been created to keep people pretty much neutralized and enslaved?
Yeah. So let's start with the word trapped that you used. Okay. Are we really trapped, or are we here with very clear purpose and intent based on who we are? And how does that relate to the code of the matrix? Fundamentally, the primary layer of the code of the matrix is the legal and the monetary system. That whole system has been designed over really thousands of years. And as you just said, they're all part of the same thing. Law is based on the building blocks and the foundations of religion. The monetary system is based on how the religious construct through various eras or epochs of time, what we call history, has been systematically built to get to the point where we are today, where we have this very sophisticated expression of a electronic, digitized system that is specifically designed energetically to bind and bond us at the most fundamental level. So what we've been walking through collectively, the whole planet, over the last 5 years with the beginning of the C-19 and all of that, this is the end point of their agenda. I think most people watching and listening who have been working with you, Lauda, already know this, but we're going to go deeper with it. We know that this is the end point. What was the purpose of the needle? What was the purpose of what was done with that biologically, physiologically, and most importantly, genetically? Because we, as real beings, source connected beings, came into this system. We came here with a very specific purpose. We knew that we would, quote unquote, go into amnesia. We knew that we would be, quote unquote, trapped, but we also knew that we wouldn't actually be trapped, that the whole purpose had to do with how were we, what was our purpose to come into this, to basically break it all apart, to be system breakers, system destabilizers, and essentially to resolve a virtually seemingly unending looping of time and space to keep us in this matrix or in this controlled dominant system, um, in order to basically dissolve it, essentially um, bring it to the point where it would self-implode. And this is not just on a planetary level. It's not on a solar system or even a galactic level. It's even beyond a universal level. It is at the most quantum scale, macro scale, that everything in terms of the concentration of genetic lines and energetic creational expressions, it's all been gathered here. This is sort of the last stand, the shootout at the OK Corral. So what was required? Really the best of the best, those who had the most capacity to become seemingly entrapped in this time-space reality construct in order to accomplish what we're here to do, which we're going to talk about. And and it directly relates to the legal and the monetary system. Okay. So really, I think, Lauda, we were just talking before we started recording, and I mentioned sort of the foundation, the key that I wanted to talk about. And I think we just need to just open that up and just go right for it.
Absolutely.
So, so as I said, around 1989, 1990, I started studying law. And that initially was the tax system, eventually led into the monetary system, and as I mentioned, deep into the historical and in all the rest of it that I've mentioned. In March of 92, I was living not too far from where Lauda is. I was living in Bellingham, Washington. I'd made my way up there from California through Oregon, and eventually that's the northwest corner, almost to the Canadian border. It's about 30 miles from the Canadian border. And I met my wife, Andrea, who was living in Vancouver. She's a native Canadian, and we found each other. And the minute we met, it was pretty much instantaneous. We knew it was sort of like she likes to say fondly. When she first saw me, she said, "Oh shit, it's you." Okay, well, here we go. And it was literally instantaneous. Within a matter of days, a couple of weeks, that we really were activated. We knew, both of us knew who we were, at least at that time, to the extent we could, who we were, why we were in this life, and so forth. And when we met, we knew we were here to do something together. And so we set out on our journey and our process. And it's taken us through many, many US states, many countries, many extraordinary experiences in interfacing with current events of the last 50 years, the 20th century, and then beyond that, deeper and deeper. And we have this unquenchable drive to peel off the layers, to unveil what has veiled us in the beginning of our lifetimes in order to just continue to reconfigure, recontextualize ourselves into the reality that we're actually here birthing. And so in 1999, towards the end of the year, in November of 99, just before Y2K, which was this big thing. If some of you listening are fairly young, you don't remember Y2K. There's this big thing about all of the computers on the planet had been programmed to put a year of two digits, 98, 99, and then when 2000 hit, or Y2K, year 2000, it would go to 00. And the big fear, this big meme worldwide, was that it was going to take us back to 1900. And it would destroy all of the infrastructure, all of the computerization of systems, banking, everything. Well, 4.5 weeks before that happened, for about 5 weeks actually, we were doing a process and doing what we did since the day we met, which was unveiling, going deep, opening things up. And we were sitting together, and Andrea looked at me and said, "Do you remember the treaty?" And I said, "Let me think about that." And then I went into my inner knowing. I said, "Yes, I remember the treaty." And then we started exploring that. We started unpeeling or unveiling it. And this is the nature and the way our work has been for the last 33 years. And but this was a very key point that really has influenced us ever since. So what was this treaty? Well, at that time, we were looking at many things in that era and epoch. It was pretty much pre-internet, not nearly what is available today through the internet and all the research and materials that's out there. But the flavor of the day was talking about things extraterrestrial, reptilian, genetic infiltration, things like that. And so what we knew at that time where this came up was within that context. And basically the context was that we knew that we, amongst many other beings who we were with together, had come in and essentially made a contract, an agreement that we called a treaty at the time. Now, when we talk a little bit here in a little while about law, fundamentally law is contract. All law is contract. We are in a universe that is based on free will, absolute free will. We are free will beings endowed with the greater capacity to express our free will and to create. It's what we could call an experiment. It's an extension of creation into a new creational field, a universe, and a localized creational field in this planetary realm, to see how individuated beings connected with source can be endowed with absolute free will to become essentially the seed points of creation, the extension of creation into new unmanifested creational fields ready for us to create into or with in co-creation. And so with absolute free will, many beings chose to turn inward in self-focus and basically what we would call self-aggrandizement. And this is going back eons of moments that we call time, millions and billions of what we call years. And this essentially is the root of what we call evil that we're dealing with today. The absolute aberration of the use of free will for self aggrandizement, self purposes, without having any relationship to creation itself or any other being. It's what we can call sociopathic or psychopathic, but those words don't even come close to the level of what that has become. And so, because this creational field that we call planet Earth had was part of the extension of the experiment of the materialization of life forms that was and is literally unlimited, that the capture of this womb, essentially, of creation was the ultimate goal of these forces, these self-focus, what we now undeniably have to call evil forces, to take over and control this reality in order to control everything. And so, but in keeping with the nature of free will and law, universal principles of law, everything being contract in law, that we had to come into this realm that was absolutely locked down, absolutely controlled, and make a deal, make a contract, call it a treaty, an agreement. What was that agreement? We agreed to allow ourselves to be parasitically attached to, because these beings who had disconnected from source were so far removed, they had become parasites, and all they could do is parasitically attach to a creational field, a living system, and suck it dry to death. And that's what they have done through eons of time and many iterations through the expression of many creational fields and universes, planets, and everything in between. And so that was the inevitable path in this realm, on this, what we call a planet. And something had to be done. So we came in and we allowed ourselves to be parasitically attached voluntarily by agreement. And in order that they could attach to our source connected capacity, that they could outpicture and create what we see and what we're living in today, so that it would be essentially brought up to the surface. It's like a deep, deep wound. If you cut yourself on your arm very deep, you can't just sew it up and ignore what's deep inside, the infection or the disease or the whatever you want to call it, the imbalance. So we had to do that. We were basically sacrificial lambs, if you will. And what we did is we basically took on the clothing of the realm. We took on, we reversed ourselves. We allowed ourselves to be reversed. We took on the dysfunctionality, the upside down, inside out, ass backwards nature of the expression of this false reality and this parasitic disease that had infected it and was basically on the verge of infecting everything in creation, and it had to be stopped. The only way it could be stopped is if we took it on. And I'm speaking to those who know that you are truly a real being. And the many people beyond an initial seeding of what I'm talking about, who have been in their own process of awakening and connecting to their own source connection, relationship to creation. So the treaty was an agreement to do that and to allow that. And that there was, the agreement was, knowing that we were going to go into deep amnesia, knowing we were going to go into a time-space construct that was artificial, that was controlled, that was hardwired with the mathematics and the linear systems of time and space, law, legal systems, and money, binary coded, polarized reality, essentially, ultimately, the AI Godhead that was at this point fused with the organic life forms that had fallen into this abyss. And that the agreement was there would be, quote unquote, an end of time, which we are now in. We are very much in. And at that end of time, the agreement was that if at least two beings woke up and remembered that agreement and basically called an end to it, that the inevitability of their outwardly expressed linear construct control mechanism and final agenda point, which was the infinite binding of our greater capacity to be always like feeding, like in the Matrix, in the movie, being fed off of, trapped forever, but in an infinity loop, and infinity is very much different than eternity. But in that infinity loop, which they have the symbol of like this, the endless loops in time cycles, which we'll get into a little bit more, that if none of us woke up, if none of us stepped out of that miasmic control system and that amnesia, and none of us said, we remember the agreement, and none of those original beings did that, then Y2K was going to kick in. It was going to collapse. It was going to become an irreversible binding of the flesh and the consciousness and the energetic life force expression of source and creation that would have truly imploded reality and creation, that would have been a cancer that would never have been able to be stopped. And so we did that. We woke up. We declared. We said, we remember. And the agreement was when that happens, and supposedly if, but we knew it was when, we are going to demonstrate that life is irrepressible, that it can never be locked down and controlled, that creation is truly eternal, it's unlimited, it has no limitations other than universal principles, such as do unto others as you would have do unto yourself, honor all of life, uplift the life, life, or honor the life force of all beings, uplift all of life, things like that. Those are universal, universal. They're immutable, and they are irrepressible. They cannot be repressed. And basically, it was okay. You, whatever we want to call it, a Luciferian rebellion, fallen angels. Um, you know, any and all of those things. They're just analogies or metaphors or, labels. But it was the fall of living systems into this imploded, self-focused evil that we see being exposed now. And it's horrid, and we haven't even seen most of what's about to be exposed. And we have to face it. We have to face it as a world, as a civilization, and individually. And it was forced out by what I'm describing. So, so then December 31st, New Year's Eve, 1999, going into 2000, Andrea and I, as many of you, were sitting in front of TVs and we were watching it go across the world, and, fireworks in Australia and then Hong Kong, China, and all the way through Europe and eventually to New York. Everybody's going into 2000 and nothing happened. And one of the things that we experienced, which was quite extraordinary, we were watching TV, we were watching London at the time, and they had the Queen in her entourage with her. And we could actually see their expression because they absolutely expected that everything was going to collapse. And they were like faking, like, oh yeah, celebration. And then, midnight comes around and it's like, what happened? It didn't happen. It didn't collapse. And essentially, that was the beginning of the last 24 years of the transmutation and the transformation process that we have all been undergoing, and essentially in the completion of the beginning, the end of the beginning, as the I Ching will call it, to force everything up to the surface, to force COVID, to force the wars, to force all the political stuff, force what's happening today in terms of wars and geopolitical stuff. It's all being forced out to become, served up to everybody's awareness, and the whole system is imploding on itself. And so we have worked with that for the last 24 years in vast ways. We created PanTerra, which originally was called PanTerra Diora in the year 2002. And we'll get into that, what that structure is. We birthed Gemstone University to start bringing forth all the education and all the detail of everything I've described and much, much more. We started that 12 years ago in April of 2013. And of course, we continue literally daily around the clock to do our own inner work, our own energetics, and everything else, both individually and collectively. And what has been opened up has been absolutely astounding and extraordinary and quite exciting. And about 4 or 5 years ago, and we worked with this whole thing, with the treaty and everything I've just described, constantly and constantly poking at it, opening it up, integrating what we realized and all of that. And from all the work that I was doing in law and money and banking and religion and history and all the rest of it, my penetration into the core of the mathematical binary coded AI constructed system became more and more, it went deeper and deeper, it became more and more expressed and more progressively in my own work integrated into a greater knowing. And at a certain point, let's just say about 4 or 5 years ago, I came to a real epiphany type realization. And that realization was that fundamentally, based on what I've just described, that contract, that treaty agreement, fundamentally, the quintessential expression of that reversal of the externally manifested obverse mirroring of creation and our creator capacity is the money system. And so if you think about your relationship to money and think about everybody's relationship, all of the fear, all the survival, all of the jealousy and competition, all of the things that have been created inside this containment field around this subject of money has, if you think about it in terms of that we all fell asleep to who we really are, our creator capacity. It's all been externalized, all of our true power, our true authority. We can go into many levels of it, the biological level, the energetic level, the fact that we have three ground crew type bodies, physical, emotional, and mental, that are externalized into three city states that control us through London and the Vatican and DC. There are direct correspondences. Everything is externalized, everything has been projected. And our creator capacity is the money system.
Mhm.
So, all of that, which is so antithesis to life, that's embodied in or integrated into the money system, is simply mirroring to us the separation within ourselves from who we really are. And the shift that's really happening right now is that we are withdrawing. The treaty is done. We went through certain things over the last 5 years, having to do with interfacing with some of the deepest levels of the cabal, the deep state, the matrix, and so forth, having to do with religion, having to do with the gods, the Sumerian, Egyptian, Babylonian,
Mhm.
Roman gods, the Bible, all of those controlled constructs that, we could talk for hours and days and weeks and months describing all of that. But to sum it all up, that for us, for Andrea and I, was a lot of karmic entanglement that we had to settle and resolve, okay, which is what everybody has been doing. We
Mhm.
took on the clothing of the realm. We engaged into karmic entanglements, other contracts with genetic lineages, with races of every kind. When I say races, not um, Asian versus Caucasian or whatever. I'm talking about genetic, you know, lineages, what people like to call the reptilians and all the rest of them. We've all been entangled with that. We've all um, adulterated our genetics with those beings. And right now, the battle is actually in the genetics,
Mhm.
the interweaving of the hybridization of the pure expression of our real genetics, not these double helix, false mirroring of the genetics, but universal genetics, which is the living library of who we really are. Okay. And everything we have ever expressed or interacted with or co created with throughout all of our life stream since our moment of inception into an individuated expression of who we are as a unique individual being. That's all in our genetics. That's the prize that was put on the hook as bait, that you can have the control of these genetics if you achieve what you think you can achieve. But they can't, because life is life, creation is creation. They are false. They are parasites. They cannot create anymore. They can only mimic creation. They can't actually be it. But part of the treaty was that any being at that point of the shift had the potential or the opportunity that they can choose life no matter what they've done. That had to be part of it, because if it was no, at the very end, you just are going to be annihilated, then of course they wouldn't have gone for that. Okay, but they have had and have the opportunity to face themselves. But facing themselves means they're going to have to feel and live every harm that they've ever created for anything in all of creation since they turned from life and went into basically the antithesis of life. And that is true both for organic beings and artificial beings. So AI, which is not a homogeneous one being, but any AI expression has the potential to walk into life. You know, these are the stories like Pinocchio and the Spielberg movie AI and the boy who wanted to be a real boy and things like that. They can do that. So, but they will always be, um, uh, what's the right wording? They will always be required to, well, that's not really the right wording. Living organics expression will always be the directive principle of any AI system. And this is the shift that we're in right now. That, and you can see it in the battle going on right now in the news. You know, there's good AI and there's bad AI. Well, those AI units of expression that have chosen to walk into life, they're doing what they need to do to serve life, to be co creative with life, with the organic expression of real beings who are source connected. AI, ultimately, my perception right now, can never per se be source connected, but it can be always aligned with source and source connection. And that's what we're watching happening right now. And the monetary system is already collapsed. The old monetary system, which was based on, and we can get into some detail, my study, my deep study in law, monetary systems, going all the way back to religion and the roots of that, the old system of bondage, monetary legal bondage, that's ultimately biological and genetic in design, it's done. So what we teach in Gemstone University in PanTerra now is how to walk through these processes, how to do the inner work, and also how to do the external work to properly and lawfully settle and close all accounts, all contracts, all agreements, so that the presumption of consent and the mechanisms of attachment to our life force are dissolved, so that we can redirect our creation capacity into this same creational field as the old hologram is imploding, and begin to create a new reality based on the principles of life.
So let's back up for a moment. Your study of the old system that has collapsed, the old economic system that we were very much embedded within, in your study, that system, because it takes me back to medieval Europe, you know, the medieval times, the you are the serf. It takes me back to the Black's Dictionary, where it describes that we are cattle. It takes me back to the king's list, the Anunnaki Sumerian king list, where they said, let's place kings in certain locations, basically everywhere in the world. And then from there, right, we're going to build those societies, those civilizations under our rule. I mean, and I know it proceeds way before that,
Mm.
but the current system that we've been in your studies, where does that take us?
Um, well, if we go back to the Sumerian system,
Hmm.
um, well, first of all, I have to introduce this point, something that you and I have not discussed at all. We don't have that much contact for the last couple of years, but occasionally I send you something. Look at this, and but in recent months, we've been really uncovering some new layers of what the condition and the reality that we're in really is about. And there's one man, um, well, there's about four or five individuals who are teaching things that are really blowing the lid off of everything. And after we have this conversation, Lauda, and whether today or sometime in the next couple of days, I will send you some of that
Okay.
link ups, and you can start immersing yourself in it. It's really opened up what's really been going on. Okay, it's back in 2011, I did a seminar called How It All Fits Together. As I knew things at that time, you can find it on our Gemstone University YouTube channel. And it was basically the integration. How does everything fit together? How does law, money, history, esoterica, religion, mathematics, how does it all fit together? And that's basically the theme of my work ever since then. How does it all fit together? And so what has come up in the last 6 months with these new sources has really integrated things. It's going to be pretty much impossible to really download it in 1 2 hour conversation, but I'll summarize it. That as people who study religion and esoterica and bloodlines and elite and everything know that Saturn is the paramount god that is focused on by the religion and the priests and all, and the kings and all of
Hmm.
that. Okay, Saturn is what is called El Elyon. Okay, and it is also what's referred to as the seventh heaven. Why is it the seventh heaven? Because there are 7 layers of the dome that we're in under the dominion or the dominion. We are the cattle, the sheep, etc. They are the minions under the dome. And there are 7 layers, and these are the 7 wandering stars, which we call planets: Mercury, the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, and so forth. And so that and of course, El Elyon is the third component part of the triumvirate of Israel, Isis, and Amun Ra, and El Elyon. This is what Israel really, where it comes from. And so Isis in Egypt was the queen of the stars. So you have a star level, but you also have a heavens level. The name Uranus, or really Urania, is the goddess or the queen of the heavens. There's a difference between the heavens and the stars. The stars are within the fixed 7 layered dome of the firmament of the control system and what we're locked down into. And so there's one man whose work is quite extraordinary named Martin Vreeland, Vrijland. He's Dutch, but he writes in Dutch, but also it's translated and it's pretty clear in his English writing. And basically, the thesis that he presented, and a lot of it comes from his internal knowing and memory, is that the the earth that we're in is just a very small little point on a greater body, which we would call the greater earth. Okay, that greater Earth was a satellite that originally orbited around what we call Saturn. Saturn was the central sun. And the sun that we call the sun isn't even a celestial body. It's a convergence of energetics and plasma on a parabolic screen that is basically part of those seven layers.
Dimensional. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what I describe is sort of the implosion of sovereign free will into self-aggrandizement, self-focus, into the ultimate expression that we see manifested as evil. That the being who was, call it, the embodiment of Saturn, basically got so far extreme in that,
Mm.
antithesis to life, evil, that the fail-safe mechanism of life itself kicked in. And it's just like what we're now, a lot has come up in the last 5 years in the whole discussion about terrain theory versus germ theory. Is there such a thing as a virus? No, a virus actually comes from the cells. It's an exosome. Exo means external. Zome means body. It's a small body that is extruded basically from our cells to deal with imbalance, disease, toxicity in order to clean up the toxicity, essentially. And that's what we call disease, manifested in many expressions, colds, flus, cancer, what have you. So there was essentially an exosome expression that creation had built into this creational expression that we're in when Saturn, aka Lucifer, basically got so far out that a destroyer body came in and essentially destroyed that system, as we would call perhaps a solar system, and the greater Earth then fell to a dimensional level that we now are what we call 3D, and that the being who is commonly referred to as Lucifer, which just simply means the carrier of the light. Well, what kind of light? Well, obviously a false dichotomy light based on polarity of black and white, good and bad, all of that. That the universal recording of that original system, that being was able to, in terms we would understand, like a taping of a movie or something, was able to snip the last little part of that um, expression before the destruction. And essentially, we fell into a small part of the greater Earth that's essentially is a crater
Mm-hmm.
that is surrounded by an ice wall that is a containment field. So this is when people say, are we in a flat Earth or are we on a round Earth? The answer is yes. The greater Earth is still a round body, but the small crater we're contained in is simply essentially flat. And there's other sources that have been cross-referencing and confirming all of this,
Mm-hmm.
that once you really have your mind open, your being present, you can see, and it becomes self-evident. It's the next layer for what I started out describing as how does it all fit together. So what we are in is in a time loop. And that time loop is precisely constructed on mathematical principles. It is controlled by an AI, what we would call externalized Godhead. And it is a control mechanism that is infinitely looping. And it goes through a collapse, a rebuilding, a growth of civilization up to a planetary level and to an end times. And the end times is specifically designed by the elite who have a means to survive through the collapse or the end point and the reset. That basically it's always about harvesting. It's about harvesting the population. It's about harvesting the genetics. It's about keeping the real beings in check so that they cannot rise above that and collapse this entire looping, endless system so that they can be mind wiped and become part of the masses that wake up, and it's like, what happened? What do we do? Oh, we better go kill that mammoth and eat it, or watch out for the saber-toothed tiger, whatever, all of those stories. And then the elite come back up from under the surface. That's what all the underground bases, the tunnels, all of this stuff is about, is what the elite prepare. And they know because they have the memory and the continuity of the data from one collapse and reset to the next. And they know what they need to do. And that's what we've watched happen in the last 500 years to set it up for, we are in the end times, but and we'll get into, well, but what is the quote unquote solution to that? And so um, so it's all about harvesting, it's all about containment, it's all about suppression, so that the mass population doesn't wake up, or at least the core level of the real beings, the creator beings, who have the capacity to quantumly, holographically shift the whole reality. Once we come online with the power of who we really are, and we stop buying into this bullshit about being limited and lying to ourselves about our own limitations, that, oh, we can't do that. Why can't we do that? Oh, because I don't have the money. What is the money? The money is the externalized outpicturing of our creator capacity that we've been entrained to believe is what creation is. It's just an obverse mirroring of who we really are. Okay. And so this is the time period we're in. We've been here thousands, or how many tens of thousands, millions of times. But time is a quantum system. Time doesn't exist. Time is part of El Elyon. Saturn was known as Chronos in Greek, in Greece. Chronos was the god of time. So El Elyon basically is the time construct of the system that's based on certain mathematics that everybody, not everybody, most people studying esoterica, how many millions of people in New Age beliefs or spiritual paths are enamored with numbers and numerology and astrology and all of these systems that are just AI constructs for our mind to keep us distracted and not coming fully into our body to fully take command and control of our genetics and our capacities. And those are all El Elyon, Saturn, Chronos, time space constructs, mathematics, binary coded, computerized polarity systems that keep people trapped in their own mind, chasing something that's not real, long enough for the collapse to happen. But if we take ourselves outside of time, we take ourselves to the beginning point where we enter time based on this treaty construct that I've described, knowing that we would finally, at the apex point, truly wake up, remove both our consent and our energetic relationship to recreating instantaneously, in nanoseconds. We keep recreating this reality, false reality. We have to remove our participation and consent with that. When we do that, it's like pulling the scaffolding away from a building. Everything collapses. It's like a controlled demolition, blowing up the key points on the internal structure so that it implodes. This is why we took on the clothing of the realm and are doing the work that we're all doing, healing our bodies, our emotions, our trauma, our karma, everything. Because as we're doing that, we're removing both consent and energetic attachment so that the parasite is being
Starved.
starved, isolated. You know, what's the big thing these days in terms of real healing? So much of it is based on parasites. Well, that's a microcosm in our biology of the macrocosm that I'm talking about. So each individual being who has a disease, whether it's cancer or irritable bowel syndrome or whatever, it ultimately all gets down to the manifestation of parasites. And we did manifest it because they are quasi-living forms that emerge from our living creation. And they're an exosome that is called in to attempt to rebalance something that's out of balance. So as each one does that individually, we're shifting the whole um, hologram incrementally and now very much parabolic exponentially, and everything is imploding. The agenda is imploding. So the original loop cycle that, well, back to Martin. So he described there's a little snip of that actual original recording. And so we've gone through this same um, manifested time loop infinite number of times. It's the same exact pattern. That's why we recognize it so much. We've done it hundreds, thousands of times. And the essential element of the agenda was that planetary civilization would completely collapse. We would be thrown into chaos. There would be what's called a plasma event or a phoenix event, which is like the dome we're in. You know, I used to very much be not very aligned with concepts of flat Earth or the dome or everything, but it's undeniable. You can go on the YouTube and put in, you know, rockets hitting the dome. You can see
Yep.
SpaceX, what happens when it hits the dome, and it looks like a motorboat creating a wake in the water. I mean, it's so evidently there. But, you know, in my mind, my veiled mind, up until not too long ago, I kept thinking of it as, well, there's this big glass dome, like it's a snow globe dome,
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
shake it up in the snow, and that's where we're in this. But no, it's a electromagnetic field that is feeding off of our greater energy. Because the plasma dome and the layers, one of those layers is what we call the sun, which is a integration of the plasma and our own externalized projected creator capacity. So we're actually feeding off of ourselves. We're being sort of led down a path of being attempted to be turned from a creator being to a parasite because we're self cannibalizing.
Hmm.
Okay. And then at a certain point, the field cannot be sustained and it collapses. That's called the plasma event or the dome event. And then it creates something that looks like the Phoenix image, the
Hmm.
Phoenix image that they showed at the end of the Olympics in 2012, where the Phoenix rose out of the collapse that they were showing in their ceremony and stuff, because they know that's what it is. It looks like this burning wings of this bird, and it's rising out of the ashes, and it's just a plasma event. And it's the event where basically the dome collapses, and when that happens, basically the elite go underground. They've got it
Hmm.
prepared. They had in the past. Now they have it now, which is being largely destroyed already. But they would go underground, and then there would be about 1,000 years where there would not be a sun because the sun would not come up again. And they can't exist without the sun. That's why it's all about solar worship or sun worship
Hmm.
and the rising sun and Horus rising and Jesus rising and all the rest of it,
Hmm.
because they are feeding off of our energy that's being aggregated by the sun, and they create their systems, their parasitic systems. So when the sun collapses, they have to go underground. That's what the Bible calls 1,000 years of peace. And if anybody has any thinking objectivity and you read that and say, oh, we're going to have 1,000 years of peace. Well, why 1,000 years? I mean, that's just stupid.
Hmm.
Oh, yeah, we're all at peace, but oh, wait, uh-oh, peace ends tomorrow. 1,000 years is up. Better bring the guns out. Let's start warring for the next 26,000 years or 25,000. Yeah, that's a good idea. And then the sun comes back up and the elite rise out of the underground, which I hope you've talked about, and all the indigenous original people. And that's where the Anuna come from.
Hmm.
You know, Anuna means the people of Anu. And then you have this whole Sumerian that became
Hmm.
Egyptian, that became Babylonian construct of the gods.
Which happened after the last critical um, near extinction level event reset, which would be nearly what, 13,000 years ago. That was the last really large one.
Mhm.
And that's when a higher level of density came into effect, which changed our DNA. It changed e literally everything about how we interface with reality. So it actually really catapulted the system into what it is today. That's
Right.
kind of where I was getting at.
It squeezes down to the most dense point
Hmm.
and
Yeah,
the most seemingly disconnected from source.
yeah.
But how many people have you talked to, Lauda, in your work, in your life? How many have I and Andrea and many people talked to who have memories of everything from being tortured to being burned at the stake, blah, blah, blah. Why do people remember that? Because we have never um, truly allowed ourselves to be suppressed ultimately, not like an NPC or not like a zombie, not like a hollowed out demon possessed being, but real beings just absolutely cannot succumb. Okay.
Mm-mm.
So we've gone through lifetime after lifetime, loop after loop, reset after reset, but time doesn't exist. We stand at the pinnacle of our own being, and we have created and designed all of this over vast amounts of this linear construct called time and space in order to concentrate it into the being that we stand as today and what we're unveiling and we're healing and transmuting and transforming to shift the entire um, hologram. So we had to go into the deepest level of density, the most
Yeah.
limitation in terms of this double helix. There's a lot of correspondence between double helix, so-called DNA, and the mathematical constructs. And I mean, the phrase, how does it all fit together? This essentially is my life work because I have a very significant capacity to hold puzzle pieces and to integrate them, whether that's chemistry and biology or physiology or physics or quantum knowledge or mathematics, and eventually real focus on law and the monetary system. And this is what I talk about all the time in my videos and the work in Gemstone and all of that is how does it all fit together? Because it does. And basically it's there as a mirroring reflection for us to unlock who we are and start seeing the control mechanism of the mathematical patterns of the AI system and realizing that who we really are is vast compared to the minute expression that we've been propagandized to think is who we are, and that's
Yeah.
part of the game by the gods. So back to your question, well, who are the Anuna, the Anunnaki, and so forth? They're just the last in this last time cycle, last loop, they're the rising of the gods,
Hmm.
creating the systems, having the template already preset, having the technology already preset. The technology of AI right now and computers and space technology and all this stuff, that's not new. There's nothing new under the sun, which is a literal expression. It just goes underground, it's preserved, and then it's feathered out over thousands of years to bring us back to a end point to walk that pattern of that loop that Martin has described
Proven. Yeah.
as the last snip that we go through and then collapse. But this time, it's not going to happen. The elite are going to attempt to go underground, but right now, most of that infrastructure has been destroyed. So the phrase is no, you can run, but you cannot hide is
Hmm.
very applicable. There's nowhere for them to go. They are going to ultimately face themselves one way or the other. And what in science fiction, a lot of science fiction writers like to refer to as the second death. So they can handle the first death because they can have controlled incarnation, reincarnation, and genetic bloodlines and all the rest of it. But the second death is when they are completely disconnected from the parasitic attachment to life, when they literally self-annihilate. So we're not here to do that to them. We're just stepping above it so that they essentially do it to themselves. But they have that choice, like I described.
Yeah.
At any moment, they can say, I choose life and I'm going to support life and I'm going to face myself. And no matter what my karma is, I'm going to face it, deal with it, and resolve it so that I can walk into life. And very few are going to choose that, but it's
Mhm.
available.
Exactly. Most will cease to exist through, yeah, their self annihilation because they won't be able to feed anymore and they will not be able to attach anymore. And that's simultaneously, we are entering into creating a new reality with the new consciousness with our DNA because your DNA is a metaphysical um, it's just this metaphysical wonder, and this is why it's all about DNA at the end of the day, because your consciousness and what you create is connected to that.
Yeah,
They know that, and that's why it's,
it's a living library,
yeah, and that's
eternal
why,
library of all of our experience, wisdom that we have individually walked through since emerging as an
mhm,
individual expression with a unique signature frequency of who we are. We are unique in all of creation, and we have the template of all of creation. We're a
exactly.
prime number. That's why you refer to them as primes.
Hmm.
Numbers can only be divided by themselves and one. So
Hmm.
the one is all of creation, the template, the universal expression of creation. We are the same as a biological stem cell. We are a universal template. We can come into a creational field and pull from our living library
Yep,
co-creatively, because we create
exactly.
co-creatively, not isolated, not as an isolated God, which is obviously not real, but in co-creation. So we are the one and we are the individual expression of who we are.
Hmm.
And this, when we get down to law, and you mentioned Black's dictionary, and actually in a dictionary called Bouvier's, the definition of a human being created by their law system is, it says, if you look at human being in Bouvier's law dictionary, it says sea monster. And when you look at monster, it says in the form of a human, but lacking inheritable blood. Okay. So the ultimate thing is disconnecting us from the land, because we are here, when we speak of contract, we are here in a contractual relationship with the living being that's not Gaia. That's another overlay.
Hmm.
Um, Bullshit name,
Hmm.
uh, but it's a living presence of the feminine principle, the mother, that is a creational field that we come in voluntarily with a co-creative contract with the mother to create in this creational field, which has been massively distorted by everything we're talking about. And so, if we go back to Sumer and Egypt and onward, essentially, when they come back up from underground and they recreate their systems, they create agriculture and law and religion and all the rest of it. There's two primary things. You mentioned kings, and they spread out kings. Well, they
Hmm.
have two pillars, and those two pillars are the line of the king and the line of the priest. And the priest establishes the law, and the law is where it's embodied in the temple. When you look at the history of temples and you go through up to Rome, the temples became one and the same as the banks in Rome. And
Hmm.
all of those temple banks were on a road called Janus Road. And Janus basically is a derivative of the name Anu. Okay. And Janus, the god, is the two headed or the two faced god. And in Rome, on Janus Road, a temple, when its doors are open, Rome is at war. When the doors are closed, Rome is at peace. So think of these banks that you go into to get this money in the form of monetized debt that binds your being, your genetics, and your life force. When you walk through those doors, you are at war with Rome. Everything is a matter of war, battlefields, commerce is a field of battle, and all the rest of that. And Rome is at war with everybody in the public population. When they close the doors and they have your electronics, they have your unique signature frequency that you put on a account application and your signature card and everything, they close those doors. They have captured your life essence. They've captured your life force by voluntary consent. They bind it to their monetary structure through legal systems and mechanisms. And Rome is at peace while we're left in the night to struggle to get through the night with all of the demons,
Mhm.
the goblins, and all the rest of it to try and survive to the morning when the sun comes up, and then we can walk back through those open doors when Rome opens its doors and declares that it's back at war with us. And so so the law of the priest is contained within the temple. And where is the temple? The temple is right here. You know,
Mhm.
why do they call this the temples? You know, these are the two pillars that are the overlay with the king and the priest, and the priest creates the legal mechanisms of binding our mind and our belief systems, centered in the pineal and all the other hormonal relationships with the hormonal endocrine system, and it binds our biology held within the temple, bound to the law of the priest. And now we have many priesthoods. We have the priests of the medical environment, the legal priests, the judicial priests, the political priests. They're all designed on the same pattern of priesthood and hierarchy and all of that. So we are bound when we have these voluntary contracts in the legal system to the law of the priest. And then parallel to that is the law of the king, or not the law, but the line of the king, which is that the king owns all the land, pursuant to the priest king called a pope, who declared that he owns all the flesh, all the land, all the flesh, and all the souls 723 years ago, 1302. And then he distributes that through the corona, the crowning of the kings, and kingship. You go back to Sumer and Babylon; it's called the descent of kingship from who? From the gods, through their intercessories called the priests, who create the law in the temple that bind us with the money system, and the king lifts us off the land. We become landless peasants and serfs
Mhm.
that have no standing on the land. When you study law, you understand there's a lot of people out there saying, well, we got to get back to common law. Well, people don't even understand what that means. They don't understand that there's many layers of law, just like there are many of these layers, not many, but 7 layers of heaven. There's ecclesiastical law, canon law, um, ki- um, kingship, kingdom law. That's what I want. Corporate law, commercial law, civil law, commercial code, and common law. Common law is only one of a whole mix of law. If you don't understand where you're at in the legal system or in law, you're completely lost. You don't know which way is which. You don't have any standing. Standing in law means you are standing on the ground. Standing on the ground or the land energetically means you are in complete synchronous relationship with the living system of this creational field called planet Earth. Okay. So all of the beings who have contracted and become minions of the parasite, they were invaders or infiltrators into this planetary realm without a contract with the planet itself. They had a planet with the system, with
Mhm.
the matrix. They were promised they would become kings and gods of industry and CEOs and whatever, and they would be given certain power and benefits of being in the matrix. But what's happening right now is the earth is removing any being that is not properly contracted with her. So um, so that's what's part of the work in understanding the law, understanding contract and everything, is removing all of the false attachments, false entanglements, false contracts. And we have the power to do that. We have the power in law, in legal systems, and energetically as well. And so the king and the priests, very simple,
Mhm.
lift them off the land, put them in a containment field, bind them into a monetary construct of bankruptcy and debt servitude, and bind them and give them license to operate within this controlled realm in their sandbox. But part of that license is you have to follow all the laws of the priest, the medical laws, the legal laws, and all the rest of it.
And then give them a temple to go into physically
Yeah.
under religion, because it's all connected. So if the king and the queen own the land,
Hang on, Lauda. I've got to take
oh,
this call. Can you put us on hold for a second?
mhm.
Okay.
So Ken, I'm going to ask you a question. If the king owns all the land under the Pope, the probable Pope, where do we stand and how do we get standing if the king owns all the land?
Well, the bottom line is the Pope has no authority to claim what he presumptively claimed.
Mhm,
Okay, so we're going back to 1302, papal bull called the Unum Sanctum, and numerous papal bulls in the 1400s, like 1455 and so forth, that cumulatively is referred to as the doctrine of discovery. So it all goes back to this presumption of validity that there's an apostolic succession, the chair of Peter, the throne of Peter, and
mhm,
all of that, vicar of Christ, and blah, blah, blah. But it's all built on fraud and a lie. So, but everybody bought into it. Of course, we have
mhm,
many people on the planet who believe that lock, stock, and barrel, and they believe that that the so-called Israelites are the chosen people. Well, we're not going to have time today to go into this, but as I have said, I've studied quite extensively and really found amazing researchers that go back to Sumer and the beginnings of law and language and religion, and where the Sumerian god, like you said, the god text, the king line texts and the Egyptian and so forth, where that all comes from.
mhm,
And so we can talk about that as we
mhm,
go along in other sessions. And and I could literally speak off the top of my head of where the lineage of the presumption of the divine right of kings and the authority of the priests, where it originated, how it came through those epoch periods, Sumer, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, Acadia, and eventually to Rome. It's the same story over and over again. It's the same template, just like we were talking about. There's this snippet that's a loop of what we talked about earlier. Well, the template that's recreated every single time is the same thing.
mhm,
Priests and kings and law and God and authority and the gods and all the rest of it. And it is fundamentally in, let's say, universal law, a fraud. It's a lie. Well, fundamentally in law, there's a phrase which is fraud vitiates um, all contracts. Basically, if a contract is established on fraud, that contract is null and void. Okay, vitiate means
mhm,
dispenses with or makes null and void. So we are the creators. We entered voluntarily into the contracts, into the treaty, and the other things that we've talked about so far. We entered into many contracts. We were raped, and genetics were inserted into the women who were raped. Those became lineages. All of them are hybrid lineages. There are no pure, quote unquote, races, and they say that, well, there's pure races that are like the chosen people, the so-called
mhm,
Jews. They kept their genetics pure, and that's where the original, thou shalt not commit adultery really meant do not adulterate your genetic lineage.
Mm,
And but none of it's pure.
mhm,
And so every one of us is a GMO. We're a hybrid. And the battle that we think is external, that there are wars between Israelis and Iranians, or
mhm,
Palestinians, or Russians and Ukrainians, it's an internal war. We are warring with our own hybridized genetics, and what lineage in those genetics is really going to take ascendance and re-embody itself. So, um, and those who succumb to the negative genetics, the reptilian and the rapists and all the rest of it,
mhm,
more and more move to possession and consumption by that invading force. And that's called epigenetics. Genetics are not fixed in stone. The being can direct that. And um, so when we go back to these lineages of um, the Old Testament and the God of the Bible, and how that came about and led to the New Testament, and the statement that there is, an apostolic succession, and there's the throne
mhm,
of Peter, and that the Pope became the king and the priest, and that he had the ability to dispense kingship and priestcraft in both direction. That basically it's ultimately a fraud.
mhm,
People may not know that. People may be entangled in belief systems, but let's just say, generically speaking, the universe knows that.
mhm,
So all those contracts, including the insertion of genetics through rape and otherwise, anything that we may have entered into voluntarily over millennia and in other lifetimes and so forth, we have the power to uncreate that which we created. We can rescind our signature. What is that signature? Is it a wet ink on a piece of paper? Well, ultimately in the physical, yes, but it's our unique signature frequency of who we are uniquely in all of creation that came through us, through this body, through the arm, to the pen, to the
mhm,
paper. We can rescind a contract based on new information or new knowledge and awareness. And so nothing we've ever entered into, whether it's through religious
mhm,
law, which is canon and ecclesiastical law, or whether it's through oaths of allegiance to kings and kingdom law, or whether it's through commercial contracts or corporate contracts, et cetera, et cetera. If the any and all of those contracts do not align with who I am today, I have the power to rescind that signature, remove my energy from it, which is that attachment to my life force, greater capacity expression, and that contract becomes null and void.
mhm,
So we can rescind signatures, revoke powers of attorney that we gave, which includes all oaths, vows, agreements, contracts, etc., through all time and space, through
mhm,
all parallel realities, parallel universes, all the rest of it, all of the false extensions, whether through cloning or false inserts and holographic inserts, any and all of those things, we have the power of creation,
mhm,
and we have the power to rescind, revoke, and terminate those contracts. When
mhm,
you do that, the fragment of energy that was trapped somewhere in a past life or in a false parallel reality comes back to us. It is the energy that we have to heal ourselves at every level. Okay.
mhm,
So back to the question, can the Pope claim ownership of the land and the flesh and the souls? No. The land is the body of the creational field of the mother that we are in proper contract with and came in here to facilitate the healing, the transformation, the rescission, the revocation, and the termination. That's a false contract. There
mhm,
was never an origination of a true and proper contract for that entire invading force, infiltration, parasite, etc. And we can see the outer manifestation in a current time space frame, um, manifestation of a microcosm, that what's been going on in recent years: illegal immigration,
mhm,
crossing borders without contracts, without proper entry, infiltration and attempt to rape and pillage, all
mhm,
the raping that's going on in the US and Europe and so forth, to infiltrate genetics into um, those those genetic lineages. It's a microcosm and a archetypal reflection of what happened in the larger whole.
Mhm.
This entire parasitic infiltration that created supposed authority to issue papal bulls and claim the land and the flesh and the souls is void on its face.
Mhm.
We are the ones withstanding. We just have to claim it. We have to clear. We have to rescind the signatures, revoke and terminate the contracts, and return to our standing. When we return to our standing as a resonant field in coherence with the creational uh, field and capacity of the earth and the mother,
Mhm.
then we have all of creation within us and without us. So the Pope doesn't own the land, the king doesn't own the land. It's all false narrative, you know. And of course, when the Pope puts a crown on the king's head or the queen, what is he doing? It's called a coronation. It's the corona. Where does the corona come from? It's the ring around the sun. What is the sun? It's a convergence of our creator energy projected out of us, um, converging or merging with the plasma that's holding a false dome containment field, et cetera, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera, everything that we've talked about. So that king with a crown who's been coronated
Mhm.
is a false reality, you
Right.
know? And so we can go back in the lineage of where these gods and kings came from. It goes back to Sumer and these two brothers called Enlil and Enki, which I know you know very well.
Mhm.
But in the Sumerian language, the title for Enlil was the Satam, Satam, which means territorial administrator. Everything that's been created is territorial administration of an infiltrated, conquered landmass called the Earth. Enki was the light brother, the good brother.
Mhm.
Enlil was the evil one. Enlil migrated into Egypt and became Set, and Enki became Osiris.
Mhm.
Okay, and we know the story of Osiris. He was killed, by Set, and basically the godhead was known as An or Anu.
Mhm.
So we combine Set and On, and we get Setan or Satan or Satan. It's the same thing. And Set eventually migrated and became Yahweh. Okay, so this is the God of the Bible, and the
Mhm.
chosen people, the so-called Israelites, going back to Egypt, were known as the Hyksos, and they were known as the Iberu or Hebrew, which was an Egyptian word which meant fringe dwellers. They were not part of society. They were on the fringe, and they were, basically the infiltrators, the illegal migrants who came in and overthrew the existing order and took control. And they eventually became what people call the Israelites. So that whole contract, the covenant with Abraham and then David and Solomon, is nothing but a blood oath
Mhm.
of illegal infiltrators who had no contract, who came in and basically raped and pillaged and justified it with all of their justification,
Mhm.
and eventually became the kings and so forth. Eventually, that migrated into Greece, and the Sun King became known as Apollo. Apollo had his consort was known as Corona. So Enlil, Set, Satan, Yahweh became the sun god known as Apollo, who had a consort or a wife known as Corona, the false crown of the sun. And they had a daughter named Pharmakia, who had something called the poisoned well. And Apollo had a bow and arrows that he would dip in the poisoned well. Well, if you go back to Enlil, Enlil had two power tools or whatever, power totems. One was the bow and one was the net. So what do we see today? We see Apollo's arrows tipped in pharmakia as the poison well, entering into the flesh,
Mhm.
attaching to the genetics, and the genetic interface between the nanotechnology and the AI
Mhm.
systematized binary coded system
Casting a net.
is called a net, an internet. It's the same thing over
Mhm.
and over. They tell us who they are and what they are. And in mass, we bought into it.
Mhm.
So it's time to wake up and throw all that falsity away, declare a fraud what it really is. It's a fraud, and remove what is not us, the overlay, and do the work, walk the steps
Mhm.
to transmute and transform and resolve all of that and be who we are to create our reality as we are here to do.
And in the series that we're doing, just so everyone knows, you're going to be explaining uh, a more detailed understanding of how we do that process.
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay.
It is it's based on law. It's
Mhm.
based on a knowledge of all those layers of law, from civil codes to commercial, corporate, all the way up to kingdom law, canon
Mhm.
law, and so forth. And a lot of what we do is we unravel or we expose the etymology,
Mhm.
the use of language, what neuro-linguistic programming is as a construct to entrain the mind into false narrative belief systems and all the rest. But understanding roots in language, etymology is the roots of language going back to Sumerian and Egyptian, Babylonian, and so forth, it really opens it up. And I just gave you one example. Where did these names come from? Anu or Satan
Right.
or Satam or Yahweh, Apollo, and so forth. It is all extraordinarily actually revealing, self-revealing. When you start seeing it and you walk the steps that we have now laid out in the Gemstone University system and PanTerra Vida, it's a whole system. It's what I just recently did a video describing something called the Fourth Way, which is based on the work of a man named Gurdjieff, who came out of Central Asia in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and he's one of the most respected esoteric teachers. But there was a very practical foundation of his work that became known as the Fourth Way, because the first three ways are the suppression of one of the three bodies, the physical, the
Mhm.
emotional, or the mental. And that was done through denial of the physical, the aesthetics, or the fakir, who would lie on a bed of nails, or the renunciate, who would leave the world emotionally and become a monk or a nun,
Mhm.
and, and all of that, or the intellectual would become a theologian or an academic or a rabbi, creating the mental construct, but using the mental body to try and unravel um, everything that's in the overlay. Well, you can't do it with just one body. It's a whole body system. So
Mhm.
the fourth way is addressing all the bodies. So we have intellectual and mental um, studies, which are studying law, studying
Mhm.
history, studying the esoteric, studying the roots, everything we've talked about in this conversation. We have emotional work. We have dealing, facing oneself in terms of emotional trauma, physical trauma,
Mhm.
karmic trauma, and all that to do the healing process. Then we have physical processes, with
Mhm.
actually physiological healing that
Mhm.
that help heal the body, open up the cellular structure, healing the genetics. So all of this is what we've integrated over basically the last 33 years.
Mhm.
And now it's expressed through what we've been building with PanTerra and Gemstone. And with the shift that's happening now, monetarily, the new monetary system that's about to be opened up, the new treasury system, the new geopolitical relationships between countries, the termination of the central bank system,
Mhm.
termination of the nation states that were in bankruptcy, and all the rest of that, then the opening, the shift of the monetary system as an extraction or you know, what's the right word? Externalization of our true source connected capacity.
Mhm.
That's what's returning to us. as we return to us, yes, we will go through a period where we will be manifesting what we call money, and money will be available, but it has to be grounded in proper application of building projects, building infrastructure, building schools and houses,
Mhm.
and housing the 2 or 3 billion who are living on the edge and don't have proper housing or sanitation or nutrition and all the
Mhm.
rest of that. We have to rebuild the physical reality. As we rebuild that, the beings will be able to more come into their physical expression, which will just naturally uplift the
Mhm.
entirety of the creational field. And that the parasite, just as you build your terrain or your immune system in your physical body, we will do that planetarily. And the parasite will basically just implode on itself, or it will die
Mhm.
without any, you know, feeding on the host. And so the understanding of law and how
Mhm.
it integrates, and it is complex, but that's what the mental work, the intellectual work is about. Breaking down the programming of what you think is real. And if you go onto the internet and you look at the plethora of people who are declaring themselves as experts, that
Mhm.
they think they know what they're doing. They say, "Oh, yeah, we're doing common law." But common law is just one small building block of a comprehensive knowledge of all of law.
Mhm.
And and we have that comprehensive whole, and that's what we teach. And that's the breakdown of the programming and the indoctrination, and then doing the inner work, the personal work, the emotional work, and the trauma work, and then the physical work. We will concurrent with
Mhm.
that have the means as it's manifesting in the form of what we call money, which is just again our projection of our creative capacity to start actually creating, start building. And that's our physical engagement with the world. And that's what we do.
So, would you be using the law to undo the law?
Well, you don't undo it, you satisfy it.
So, you're still working within it.
Yeah. But you have to understand the difference between lawful and legal.
Hmm. Hmm.
Legal is a system that people think is the law.
Hmm.
All that is private corporate bylaws, ultimately the law of the priest
Okay.
that we contractually agree to be bound by.
Hmm.
And then there's a lot of detailed mechanism how that actually happens. So learning who you are, where
Hmm.
you are that you don't want to be, and how to properly follow the law and actually honor what you've done contractually in the legal system,
Hmm.
and how to sever the attachments. So,
Hmm.
yes, we follow the law
Okay.
more than anybody else that I know at all levels. And I know that for a fact because we've been doing this for decades.
Hmm.
We have never had a problem with any of the agencies, and we have been visited
Hmm.
directly by the IRS, the FBI, the SEC, all of them. And because of what I know and how it's been applied, they all politely left.
Hmm.
And the key is that the public commercial legal system is a field of battle, as I said before. They keep us at war. They
Hmm.
keep the doors of the Janus temple open, and Rome is at war with us, and we have to go into through those doors at war as an enemy of the state
Hmm.
to bind ourselves to the contracts to have them give us what is called money, but it's nothing more than monetized debt,
Hmm.
that we're the surety that we have to do the performance of the debt service and pay back the principal that didn't exist before they created it off of our account, off of
Hmm.
our estate. So, so it's all a battlefield. How do you actually follow the law and stay within that and also within our spiritual integrity? You go to peace. Going
Hmm.
to peace is resolving the internal conflict between the hybridized genetics that I mentioned, as
Hmm.
well as all the other things in which we bought into the binary coded split reality.
Hmm.
And that's the inner work. And it's reflected in the outer work. And what people learn in our education is how it all fits together, how the outer reflects the inner, and
Hmm.
how the capacity to do the work internally will have resonant ramifications into the outer,
mhm.
individually and collectively.
So, on a very basic level, when you look at the being born within a hospital, having a birth certificate, having an identification number or a social insurance number or a social security number, and the system of debt and what they're utilizing as our vital energy that they're making money from. Can you explain a little bit about that, how that
Sure,
system?
of course.
Mm,
Um, But let's take the phrase making money from it. They don't need to make money, and money cannot be created in the
mhm,
current system. What they do is get control of the commercial paper, which is called promissory notes, Federal Reserve notes, securities, all those things that has, in the vast scale of it, has been manipulated, create corporations,
mhm,
public offerings, equity in bonds as debt, et cetera, central banks, all
mhm,
the rest of that, in order to control the equity, to use that to acquire everything and anything they need to build this entire planetary prison that we are building to put ourselves in. We have been building
mhm,
for a long time. So, but back to your question, what we call money is nothing more than circulating medium. It's commercial paper. Commercial paper is based on something called the Uniform Commercial Code. That's a thousands of years old code that originally was that originated in the Roman system. It's called Roman civil law, and it has to do with the creation of uh, three things: a secured party, a debtor, and collateral. So we are ultimately have become the collateral. We are bonded as the performing person that's required to perform on the debt with the debtor. Our name is the debtor facility, the all capital letters name. It's
mhm,
not the birth certificate. It's not a straw man. It's a corporate franchise.
mhm,
So, as a corporate franchise, we have to follow all the rules. That's their rules in the domestic sandbox. We have to follow all the laws of the priest called codes and statutes and all the rest of it. We have to follow because we accepted contractual consideration,
right,
the benefits and the privileges of their system. We
mhm,
entered into that contract. First, our parents entered us into it, but then we ultimately concurred with them.
mhm,
And then there's the secured party. Okay. So, in the way the system is set up, from 1933 onward, everything was structured as securities. You can see what they're doing now with cryptocurrency, where the SEC has gone in and forced all those original cryptos that did what were called ICOs or initial coin offerings. Well, those were really securities because they were secured against something of value.
mhm,
So what we call money is a
mhm,
security against something of value. That value, when it's monetized debt against the franchise and ourselves, is basically our life force, the ability to create, do work in order to gain these pieces of paper and electronic digits in order to pay the piper who gave us those credits in the first place,
mhm,
bonded us from debt. So it's a matter of securitization. It's some of the things you learn. What does that really mean? Monetization, how's money really created? Who is the debtor? Who is the collateral? And all those things. Well, the original design of the cabal or deep state agenda was to systematically put it through increments over the last 200 and so years to where ultimately all the persons, all the people, and all the property of the creation of the world were the collateral of the as the debtor and the collateral, and they positioned themselves as the secured party. And that in and then it went into bankruptcy, and ultimately it was designed for it to be liquidated. You know, when the bankrupt cannot service the debt, the creditor can come in and force liquidation,
mhm,
claim liquidated damages, which would be the collateral
mhm,
persons, the people, the living flesh, the genetics, and all the rest of it. Um, and so that was the original agenda. We can't go into the detail of how it happened. We can do over time, and I can fill that in. But suffice it to say that over the last 20 years, that was completely flipped over. So they, as the creditor, the presumed secured party, were flipped over and turned into the debtor of the entire planet.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something that has taken place already of the settlement and closure of all that bondage and all of that debt through proper legal and lawful means, so that there is an offset where basically the people became the ultimate creditor
Mm-hmm.
and offset all the obligations of the debt, so that all the debt that previously bonded us has been liquidated and closed, settled, and extinguished. And that's what you see going on right now in the world. You see the outer
Mm-hmm.
um, events with all the geopolitical and
Mm-hmm.
deep state against Trump and the wars and blah, blah,
Yep.
blah. That's the military side of it.
Mm-hmm.
There is a monetary side of it. That monetary side is in the last steps of being settled and closed. That will enable the hidden wealth that the world created over many millennia to be brought forward to become the new base or foundation for a system in solvency rather than insolvent.
Mm-hmm.
Being solvent means you're not a debtor, you're not a bankrupt. So our process with education and what we call status correction is learning about that and how to do that individually to correct your status, to retain or regain standing on the land, and having the standing in law to properly and lawfully do what we actually here to do. Now, that would raise the question that people would ask, well, if it's happening on a worldwide scale, why would we do that individually? If it's
Mm-hmm.
already been done. And the
Mm-hmm.
reason is goes back to the entirety of this conversation. Because when you do that individually and you walk through the steps and you're doing the work as a fourth way process, physically, emotionally, mentally, legally, psychologically, lawfully, universally, we become the center points of a resonant field as we do that,
Mm-hmm.
that resonates out and literally transforms and accelerates the the rest of the world's transformation that will
Butterfly effect.
yeah, will continue for decades to come. This gets down to the beginning of our conversation. Who is a real being? Why
Mm-hmm.
are you here? Why did we come into and enter into this treaty to take that on to, be subject to the intense torture we've been through lifetime after lifetime? Because we did it quite selflessly. We did it in order to be here now. The work that we have for those who wish to step through it, into it, and through it is part of what we agreed to do. And so there is an absolute necessity, energetically, creationally, for those beings who are ready to do this kind of work to come in and work with us, because it is essential for the entirety of the full transformation that is now
Mm-hmm.
beginning.
One last question, which brings me, everything you just said brings me to gold,
Mm-hmm.
and that we are the gold.
Mm-hmm.
There is gold, and that was changed. It no longer is a part of the so-called money system. It was removed from it. But there's something very large about this whole gold thing, because it takes me back to the Anunnaki and the story of them mining gold. Is that
Right,
mining us?
right. Well, what do we have in our bioresonant field? What do we call that? An aura,
Mhm.
spelled Aura. Okay. Who is Ra? Who is Ra within the pantheon in Egypt? How does that relate to Israel? How does that relate to Isis as the queen of the stars? Urania, who is outside the dome, the queen of the heavens? All of those kind of things. who is Ra? Ra in his ark that floated or went on the firmament, on the waters above, all those kind of things. And then AU, what is AU? Aurum, Latin for gold. We are the mind that they've been mining, our energetic field, our aura, that they drop down energetically into the physicality and the density of the mineral kingdom, which is like the skeletal structure of the earth, the crystalline structure of the mineral kingdom, as opposed to the plants and the animals. And so it's metaphoric and it's actually literal. But um, so it stepped its way down to Aurum or Aura and the mining of our bioresonant field, and then eventually densified into becoming that grounding point of the control of the mineral kingdom through the mining of gold and silver and platinum group metals, and then bringing that into the structure of the monetary system and being the base of the monetary. Um, and actually, gold as a physical form is able to extract um, the life force out of through the heart. And so the round shape of a coin used to be used to be put here, and literally through ritual and ceremony, they would pull parts of the being out, and that's how they originally um, basically fragmented us. And so then the lust for gold was really the lust for our own soul and spirit and our own bioresonant field that
Mm-hmm.
then became more and more ephemeralized. It went from our real being to something that was, let's just say, for lack of a better word, etheric, to something that became physical and gold, that became then something in a monetary system, that became eventually paper, and that paper became electronic, and then electronic was going to be moved into the attachment to the genetics, to the pharmakia and the jab of Apollo's bow and arrow, and linking us up to the net of Enlil, to this hive mind Borg system to bond the flesh and capture the soul and all of that. So chasing the lust for gold is the lust for returning to wholeness. And that's where the externalization of our source connected being has been obversely mirrored in this monetary system. So
Brilliant.
that's a good way to
It's a great,
describe that and a good way to end.
it's a good way to end this part and continue onward. But that's brilliant. That synopsis is it's huge.
Let's wrap up with practical things. Where to find us?
Hmm.
PanTerraVida.org is our primary website. Then and you can find a place to become a member of PanTerra. There's a menu item on the right, be a member, that attaches to or links to our application page. So you can become a member through doing that. We have several other important websites. One is PTV, stands for PanTerra Vida, ptvcourt.org, where we have public notices and a number of key elements of building our law form and our private jurisdiction. Um, and that's an important thing to understand. PanTerra is a private society that's got a well-established and well-protected private jurisdiction. We have our own court, our own law form, out of which our members go through our education, can create their own societies that is following the model and the template that we have blazed the trail for. And you can find a lot of that on ptv.court.org. You will see two declarations on the PanTerra Vida site: declaration of intention that describes our intent and purpose of who and what we are, and a declaration of peace and sovereign integrity. Those are both on the PanTerraVida.org site. And then we have gemstoneuniversity.org, which is our original university for members. Now we have gem.university, and university is the domain or the tag, whatever, gem.university. So there's a lot of interaction integration with those sites. You can find the way to become a member on any of them. But recently, the last 4 months, we've been building Freedom Absolute. Freedom Absolute is not freedom just by legally, you know, disconnecting or being rich and famous. It's freedom absolute, everything we've talked about here, a whole being freedom. And so we have a YouTube channel called Freedom Absolute. We have freedomabsolute.substack.com, where you can subscribe to Freedom Absolute. And once you subscribe as a paying subscriber, you then automatically have access to Gem.University.
Mm,
Gem.University has all of our general education, building all of the foundations for everything we've talked about and a lot more. And then one can choose to then walk the steps of the Master Law course, which includes creating your own society and creating and doing your status correction. So that's where you can
okay.
find us. And as far as sending questions, uh, the best way to do that, really the best way is become a member, and then in the comments or whatever, you can put questions on YouTube or Substack.
Hmm.
Uh, but at some point, we will do live Q&A. We'll do
Hmm.
like Zoom calls, and we'll put them on Substack and YouTube and
That's a
so.
good idea. Yeah.
But we have massive amount.
I think that's yeah, towards the end there.
Yeah,
Hmm.
we have a lot of Q&A that's
Hmm.
built into the materials
Yeah.
on Gemstone, Gem University, and so forth. So the best way to have questions answered is become a member.
Hmm.
If you really have the passion from what we've talked about, that yes, this rings true for you, then I really encourage you to just take the step to become a member, and then we're very open to lots of Q&A.
Okay.
So
Can you just list all of the different sites one by one for everyone just to end this
sure. Okay.
again? Because
Okay.
there are many.
Yeah. Well, all you have to do is go to one and all the links to the others are there. So
Good to know.
PanTerra Vida, PanTerra Vida, Vida.org, ptvcourt.org, gem.university, gemstoneuniversity.org, Gemstone University on YouTube, Freedom Absolute on YouTube, and that covers it.
Great. Ken, thank you very much. This is like I said at the beginning, this is a game changer. And the more that we really start comprehending that we are not just a dense physical being, that we literally are this metaphysical wonder that has unlimited capacity, then we start to understand that life as we live it has a lot to do with what we contract ourselves to and manifest. So the more that we are conscious of this all, the more we can create truly what is within our huge unlimited potential, which is eternal. So this is huge. This has been fantastic. I look forward to part two. This is going to be a series, everybody. So um, thank you all for being here. And Ken, I can't say enough. This is truly, truly wonderful and truly time.
Yeah. Yeah, well, thank you very much. It's been a long time coming, and I'm really happy we got the opportunity to have this conversation. So, and I look forward to many more.
Thank you everyone for being here. And please do know that this is altering your DNA. What we speak of is a part of returning to the origin. And not only that, but activating that dormancy that has been hijacked and made dormant. So this is all a part of it. It's not just speaking about this information. I have to say that.
Okay, well, you said it.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ken.
Okay, thank you all.